All right, so what's up, everybody? Um, so let me see here. Let me turn on my phone. Okay, so up here we have where we left off last week. So there's one thing we didn't get to do because we didn't have enough time. We ran out of time when we got to here. So we have to uh, finish this off before we get on to the next thing that we were going to do, which is this lecture here. So we'll finish off what we were working on. That way you'll know what to do for your assignment. And then we'll jump over to this and we'll go through it. This is just going to be a lecture on sort of your like workflow and thought process of how to start a project. So we'll get to that in a minute. So let's come back to here and what we had last week, which is this. So, like I said, the last thing that we need to do is we need to put something in here, which is like going to be an animation. Because up here we have all these transforms, transitions, um, and the transforms are happening with a transition, happening in different cases, like mouse over, or when you click on something, whatever have you, and also um, having one div affect another div. We're also doing that here. So we mouse over the the section tag. We animated, or not animated, but when we mouse over the section tag, we used that hover event to move this box. So now we got to use some keyframes down here. How do we do that? Well, we already have the div set up. If you open up what we worked on last week, you should have this div in there inside of the last section underneath the second H2, say div with a class of animation box. So we could use this box to animate this div. So let's do that. So here's the CSS that we had from last week. So I'm going to go to the bottom and put an animation, so dot animation box. So we got to tell this box, well, first we got to give it a width and a height and something to let us see it. So width 200 pixels, height 200 pixels. We either got to give it a background color or a border or something, because we still wouldn't technically see it here. So let's give it a background color of white, seeing as we're using a dark background. We could give it a border. Okay. So we should see our box here. And let me just get rid of this. There's another thing that we forgot to finish, which is the rest of these links. Because I think a couple of mine aren't working. But there's the box there. So we got to do something with it. We got to make it animate. Now, to make it animate, we're not going to be using like a hover or anything like that. We're not going to be using a transition. We're not going to be using this either. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be using an animation name and then a bunch of different, like, a bunch of different properties that are going to go along with the animation name. So there's a shorthand way of doing it and there's a longhand way of doing it. I'm going to show you first. I'm going to show you the longhand way of doing it. So first would be animation name, and we got to give the animation a name. So you can call it whatever you want. You can make up any name and name it that. So I'll just call it, box move. But this isn't enough. We need to give it an animation duration. Whoops. Animation duration. And this is going to dictate how long it's going to take for the animation to go from start to finish, basically. So if you want the animation to take place over a span of 2 seconds, then you put just 2 seconds. If you want it to take place over a span of 10 seconds, and you put it, span of 10 seconds. So let's put 3 seconds. We could change this. It doesn't matter. Let me just double check. Okay. So we can change this if we need to. It's all good. But we still need an animation iteration count. And in this case, we'll put infinite. If you put like, 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever, then it'll just cycle through the keyframes that amount of times. If you want it to never stop, then infinite. And with these 3 things, we could get this to work. If we were to make our keyframes, this would work just with these 3. However, there is a 4th thing that we could put, and there's more than 4 things we could put, but in this case, I have to show you this because this will be a part of your assignment. So the animation timing function. Now, the timing function, we can tell it how we want the speed curve to happen, right? So like, if you wanted it to just go at the same speed, it would be linear. This is what you're going to need for the Pac-Man assignment, because when Pac-Man animates across the screen, you know how Pac-Man on the video game, he always moves at the same speed. He doesn't speed up or slow down, right? So it's a linear timing function that you want to animate Pac-Man and the ghosts using that. But there are other ones too, and we'll take a look at those after. We'll make the animation and we'll take a look at it. So we have an animation name, animation duration, animation iteration count, and the animation timing function. Now we have to call this and do something with it. And we do that saying at keyframes, right? So at keyframes, actually I'll do this with so this will autofill, just so you see what it looks like, what the default would look like. At keyframes with an identifier, and then an opening and closing curly brace. The identifier for so we're targeting keyframes, right? We have to target this. So this is the identifier. So at keyframes, box dash move. So we're going to target this with this, and then we're going to make the keyframes. Now, you can make the keyframes in any increment that you want, right? So like you can start from 0% and you could finish at 100%, right? Or you could start at 0% and then increment up to 100% by going 10% and so on. 10%, 20%, 30%. You could go from 10% to 50%, right? You can go up in any increment amount that you want, right? You could go up however you want, like that, you know. Now, just to go back, so 0 to 100. Just another thing to note. See how I'm writing this here? Like, you could do this if it's easier for you. Because this is what you're used to seeing, right? Like this. You know, you're used to seeing it like this. Sometimes you will see people write it like this, where they'll do everything on one line in this case. So let's just say maybe we wanted the box to transform. Let's do like a couple different things. So let's say transform translate, and we'll move it like well, we'll start at 0. So 0%, 0%. And let's say we also want to, and you don't have to use a transform. You could do anything. You could change the, like, we'll change the background color or something too. Transform, let's try to like rotate it too. Oops. So we'll start at 0 degrees. And then we'll also, actually this is wrong, my bad. This should be in here. So transform, translate, and then rotate like this. And then let's say we try to do something like background color. And we'll start it off at what it is already. But see, again, like I was showing you, it could look like this, or it could look like this. Either way, it's, you know, it's fine, right? So whichever way works for you, you can do that. But this is the only case where you would see it like this, you know what I mean? You don't want to be doing that with these, you know what I'm saying? So just keep that in mind. Just showing you that because you may end up seeing some code that is written like this, and then you don't want to be confused when you see it. So okay, so we got the transform and the background color. So let's change something about it in the 100%. So let's move it like 100%. And we can keep this one at 0. And let's rotate it like, you know, 180 degrees or something. Change the background color from white to, I don't know, red. So it should, over the duration of 3 seconds, go from this to this. I don't think I need a comma here, but let's check. Okay, yeah, so there you go. So now it'll just automatically animate itself, right? And we could change these if we wanted to, like we could do more, do less, do, you know, we could change it to 60 viewport width, right? So we'll start at 0 viewport width, and we'll go from that to this. And now let's see how it moves now. So now it's going to go all the way to the edge of this box, right? Let's do something else. Like, let's do this. Let's add more to it. Let's say border radius. We'll start at 0%, and then let's add to it here. Let's say border radius 50%. And let's see what that does now. So now it goes from being a box to a circle like that. But okay, now this is not like it works, but it only goes from point A to point B. So maybe we want it to go from 0% to 50% back 0. I say back to 100%, but what I mean is maybe we want the animation to go from start to another thing and then go back to where it started from. So 0% to 50% to 100%. So let's do that. Let's change the 100% to 50%. And then copy the 0% and paste it down here. And then change it to 100%. That way it'll go from start to finish, well, start to finish back to the start. Right, back to the how it starts here. And let's start it over. And it goes from the square to the box. Or, yeah, sorry. It goes from the box to the circle, back to the box again. Now, as you can see, the animation, the timing function is linear, right? So it just never changes speed, which is fine in some cases. And again, in the Pac-Man case, that's exactly what you're going to want to do. You're going to want it to stay at the same speed because that is how Pac-Man moves across the screen, right? But in this case, you may want to change the timing function to like ease in and out, where ease in is going to gradually, like it would look like a bell curve. So gradually start, speed up, hit a peak, and then once it gets to the peak, it'll start to slow down again. So instead of it looking like this, it'll look like this. See how it just it just looks more, I don't know what the word is, smooth. The animation curve is more smooth. That's the word, or the way to explain it. So that's ease in and out. You could just say ease, and what ease does is it sort of starts at the regular speed and then eases out and then eases back in from the out, you know what I mean? So there's that. And then there's other ones too. There's step. Say step start, which like starts like that and it just starts and finishes, right? And then there's step end. There's steps just in general where you could like kind of have it go through like step, 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 step. No, it's the stream. It's like the bit rate or whatever. On your computer, it should look better. um, Hello, some problems with internet connection. Could you please say? Yeah, you'll be able to watch this. Oh, the stream will stay up on YouTube, so don't worry about it. But yeah, it's just the upload speed or whatever. But and then there's ease in and then just ease out. There are more, um, and there's even more. I'll show you this. Because there's all kinds of documentation that will show you examples of different timing functions. And there's like a bunch of different things you can do. We don't need to go through all of them, but as long as you know that you can, like, how it works, then you can go and like look up the rest and try different things and whatever. So yeah, that's the timing function. And yeah, no problem. So that's how the timing function works, basically. So where's the, okay. And you could keep adding to this. Like this, you could literally do any and everything you want. Like you could do more. So let's actually change. We could change this to like add on top of this 25%, and then do 50. Let me just copy and paste. Easier. So 25 to 50, 50 to 75, and then 75 to 100. So let's say we go from here to, I guess this would be the middle. Well, no, we could go here and then add to this maybe. So let's say we go down 500 pixels, I guess, and then we'll go down 500 pixels. The rotate's fine, the color's fine, the border radius is fine, and then 50% will, so over, wait a minute, no, my bad. Leave that at 0. 60, 0, this is the first one. So this one, we put like 500 pixels or something here, and then we could do something else, like maybe negative rotate it or something, and then change the border radius, you know, to 10% or something, I don't know. And then make it go back to 50% here. This will be over, wait a minute. Okay, start, over, down, and then this would be bringing it back to, let me just take a look at this. It's supposed to start and then go over and then go down. Yeah. And then leave the 500 pixels here and then bring this back to 0 while it rotates again. And I don't know, you could change the colors or whatever, you know. And then back to the white. So let's see if this works. Down, over, up. Yeah. Now, because this is like, this is going to change the size of the overall HTML container, and it's going to change the size of all the containers that it's in. So the section tag, the body tag, the HTML, the container, like the wrapper, whatever, everything. We should really just take this section. I mean, if we want to be able to like scroll down and see the whole thing, then we could just take the container that it's in, section. We could just target the section using we could just target it with a, what's it called? With an int child selector, or just give it a class, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Just gotta see how many sections there are. One, I think there's 3. Yeah, 1, 2, 3. So we could just say main. So we should really do that up here above all this stuff. So main section and child 3. Let me just double check. Is main tag and not a, yeah. Okay. So main section and child, the third one, and then say like height 600 pixels or so, and this should do this. And we're gonna add to it. So 600 ain't enough. 9. You just keep incrementally changing it till it fits. There, this fits perfectly actually. There you go. Now, again, you could do more. Like this is just a quick example. You could do more. But in the Pac-Man thing, all you're really going to need to do is animate the sprites across the screen in one case, and then in another case, across the screen the opposite way. Now, I'm not going to give you the full solution to it because I want you to, like, you know, use your imagination and figure out the most logical way of doing it. But I'll give you this, which is most of it, but whatever. All you have to do is put all of those images in one div and then size the div and then animate the div across the screen with all of them in there. That's it. You're going to have 2 of them. So the first div is going to be the one that goes across the screen in one way, and another div, they're going to be facing the other way, and you're going to just animate it going across the screen the other way. And that's pretty much that. All right? Now, another thing that you want to do on the assignment is you want to make sure that when you click, see how like we did this, when you click the thing, it goes to that part of the page. You want to make sure you do that as well. The first 2 work. The second and the third one here, we didn't do. I guess we just ran out of time and just didn't do it. All we got to do is make sure we put those IDs. So yeah, we just forgot to put those IDs there. So the first one has the ID transition, which matches this one. The second one is going to have the ID of transformation, which matches this one. And then the last one is going to have the ID of, ID of animation. And there you go. Now they'll work. The only thing that's annoying is when you refresh the page, it'll refresh to that part of the page, but there you go. It all works. All right? So that is that. Now, next thing we got to talk about is this. Developer Mindset Part 2. Developer Mindset Part 1 was last semester. So this basically, in this lecture, we're going to just discuss basically how do you start a project. And this is one of the things that a lot of people that are just first starting off in this business, they kind of, you tell them, okay, I want you to start something. I want you to build this website. And then they freeze up like a deer in headlights, right? And it's the same reason why people freeze up when they attempt to learn this stuff in the first place, is because they just don't know how to picture it. They don't know how to imagine it. They don't know how to you know how to visualize it in their head. It's the same thing. Tell you to start a project, and I put, it's like I put a whole stack of work on your desk, right? And then I walk out of the room, and you're like, shit, where do I start? You know, and you gotta train your brain into not overwhelming yourself in that way, because when you overwhelm yourself in that way, you sit there and you sit there and you sit there and you never start. And then, it'll be like the night before the thing is due, and then you're like, okay, now I need to start this, and then you end up pulling an all-nighter. You don't want your workflow to work that way, and your workflow is not supposed to work that way. It is not supposed to be hard. It is not supposed to be overwhelming. It's not supposed to make you anxious or whatever. It's supposed to be a somewhat enjoyable thing. I mean, it is work, but it doesn't have to be such a pain, and it doesn't have to be so painful, right? Um, and the way that we make it less painful is the same way that we would wrap our head around this picture here, where I say, if you were going to eat this jackfruit, how would you do it, right? Or like, how if you're going to eat, like, a chicken or a turkey or a cow, how are you going to do it? You're not going to do it all in one sitting, you know. Um, there's just no way you can. Well, maybe a chicken, sure, but you get what I'm trying to tell you. If you're trying to eat a whole big thing, you do it bit by bit. It's really simple. You do it little by little. Now, we all know how to eat something little by little because it's something that we've been doing our whole entire lives. If we were to visualize our entire life of eating, then it would be like, you fill up a whole building with all the food that we all eat collectively, like little by little by little. But with this, it's something that you're just learning. So you have to learn not only what we're learning, which is like the code and the theory behind the code and how to build different things and how to use it and yada, yada, yada. You also have to learn how to initialize, um, just in general, how to initialize, so okay, I need to build this final product, but I need to start somewhere. I need to start from zero. I need to start with this character, you know, triangle bracket exclamation mark in an HTML file or any other type of file, PHP file, whatever. Doesn't matter. It could be with a graphic. It could be with a business card. You need to design the business card first. I need to design the logo first. I need to do something first. And that thing that you do is going to start off the consumption of the proverbial jackfruit or proverbial cow or whatever. You see what I'm saying? You break it up. Now, the first thing you're going to need to do is use your imagination, obviously, because you're doing something that is a creative thing, which means you have to create. You got to make the idea of the thing that you want to make, unless somebody else gives you that idea. So, if you work for a place and it's okay, we want you to build a website and we want it to look like this, well, then they just did some of your work for you. Great. You know what I mean? You don't have to design it, but you might have to design it. And if you have to design it, you got to start somewhere. Now, I know in class when we do code alongs and we just build stuff, and I'm just sort of, you know, freestyling, you know, I don't expect you to do that. And you shouldn't expect yourself to do that either, right? I wouldn't even try to attempt doing that, until you get to a sort of stage or sort of level of understanding where you can think in CSS or whatever, right? If you can think in CSS, then by all means go ahead and do that. But you have to start somewhere else. And where that somewhere else is you start with a mock-up. Well, again, first you start with your imagination by thinking, what do I want the website to look like? Or what do I want the web page to look like? Or whatever it is that you're building, right? Because you might not start necessarily with a mock-up of the website. You might start off, like I said before, with something else, a logo or a business card or something. Because maybe the logo or the business card is going to give you the color scheme for the website. You see what I'm saying? Or the overall look and feel, the vibe of the website. So you might even start with that. But whatever the case may be, you got to start with something simple, and then you keep building on top of that. Okay? So let's just say, for the sake of saying, in this case, we're going to start with a mock-up, like a design mock-up of like the layout of the website. Well, it doesn't have to be perfect. It could be, this is like some old website that I used to have. It was an old crypto blog. And what I did was I had an idea of like how I wanted the hero or the header to look. I wanted the header to be like some animation thing. It was all animated in like a cartoon, right? And you had to scroll down, or you could push a down button to kind of go through the animation and get to the bottom of it, which would bring you to the rest of the website. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, you could just start with a pen and a paper and figure out, okay, how do I want the overall template to look, like the big parts of the page. You know what I'm saying? So okay, I want the big parts. When I say the big parts of the page, I mean the layout, right? What do I want the overall layout to look like? And that's going to give you a better idea of where you're going to start. Because once you have that, once you have like, okay, I know how big I want the header to be. I know how I want the navigation to look. I know what I want the landing page, like this is like the landing page. Like, I have some icons. It's not finished. This wasn't a finished scan, but it was just like a rough idea. Like I want icons with a little write-up beside it. So there's an icon and it kind of shakes back and forth with a write-up for each one. And when you scroll down to that part of the page, use a little bit of jQuery or JS or whatever to kind of fade it in. You know what I mean? From each side, sort of thing. And then like there'll be some other content down here and blah 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 blah. Right? It's just a simple place to start from. Um, that little thing in the background getting like a little bit annoying. So let me just there. But yeah, so a place, something like this is what you could use to start, right? And once you have that, once you know, okay, I want the bigger elements to look a certain way, blah blah blah, then you can say, okay, now that you have something like this down, then you're gonna know what to build down here. You're gonna know how to start your HTML, your HTML markup, because this right here is gonna give you the the framework. And what is HTML? HTML is literally the framework of a page. So it's okay. Now I know what my boilerplate is gonna look like. You're gonna have a wrapper, and if you need one, or if you want, you don't have to use a wrapper. You all know why we use a wrapper by now. We just use it as an extra layer of control for all of this stuff. But you'll know, okay, this is what my boilerplate's gonna look like, and what my nav is gonna look like, and so on and so forth. The different parts of the page that I'm going to need, maybe you just need one main content, maybe you have two, maybe you have one, like how we built this page. We just have one main content, but we have a bunch of different sections within the main content. There's however, like, you can build it however you want. You see what I'm saying? Like, and it's the same thing like I said before. Like, this planet is covered with buildings that people go in and live in and work in and whatever. All buildings have the same function, but do they all look the same? Or are they all built the same? Some of them are, some of them aren't, right? It's the same thing with this. Same thing with the newspapers. Go all over the place, and there's newspapers all over the world in all different languages. But generally, all like generally all newspapers do the same thing. Do they all look exactly the same? No, but they're all similar. It's the same thing with websites. They all do the same thing, and they're all sort of built the same way. For the most part, most websites are built from the top down, and they have different content sections in them. You know, it is what it is, right? You got sometimes you'll see people do something totally different, and they'll have the website scrolling from side to side or something out of left field. Sure, but how many different ways can you design a two-dimensional page with content on it? You see what I'm saying? So you don't have to overdo it or overthink it. You know, it's the same thing. You can build it in many different ways. You know, so you build your boilerplate from what you got in your sort of rough mock-up. You could have a step in between here too. Like, you could go from rough draft mock-up to like a high fidelity mock-up, and high fidelity mock-up would be done in you know do you do it in Illustrator or something, Illustrator, Photoshop, whatever, right? Um, and that high fidelity mock-up is just going to be more accurate and give you that extra layer of guidance to say, okay, well, maybe certain things you were thinking of here don't work. Maybe they worked on the rough draft, but then you look at it on the hi-fi mock-up and you're like, it doesn't work. Maybe you don't like it anymore. It just gives you that extra layer of the step-by-step process of polishing it off and not doing it like, off the top of your head, right? For me personally, I sort of just work better off the top of my head, but that's just me. Some people are going to be like that, some people aren't, you know. Um, but you can give yourself extra layers, okay, in this whole workflow. And again, this here, we talked about semantically. Well, we talked about semantic and non-semantic before. This is written non-semantically. You could write this semantically. It's whatever. What we did last week, we wrote it semantically. This here is non-semantic. In my opinion, it doesn't matter. Some people make a big deal about, oh, is it written semantically or is it written non-semantically? It doesn't matter. So, you know, just do what you got to do to get the job done. And if you are tasked to do it, and the boss or the person you're contracting for says that they want it done a specific way, then cool, do it. If they say, well, we want it written semantically, then cool, write it semantically. You should be able to do both, right? And if you don't remember all of the tags, just look them up, just reference it, right? Generally, um, a div is a non-semantic tag. You could replace a div with a section tag, or like a main tag with section tags within, or whatever, right? You can have more than one main tag, you know. Um, so, just build it up, right? Now, with this being said, um, you should from this, even from the rough mock-up, you should have a rough idea of like what your classes are going to be, right? Now, remember, for me personally, by now you see my coding style. I don't use IDs for CSS. You can use them for that. It's fine if you do. But I particularly don't. I only use classes or just the tags themselves or the nth child selector. That's or you just use if I have like a different attribute, you just call the attribute. I do that as well. There's a, there's a whole bunch of different ways we can target things. I just like to keep IDs for functionality, but that's just me. But either way, you should have a rough idea of like what you're gonna name these different things, right? Like what class names they're gonna have, right? Or in the case of what we did last week, um, using IDs because we're linking to parts of the page. So we just omit the class. We don't need them. But with when you design this up, you should by the time you get to boilerplate making, you should know, okay, like I need to what you're gonna name different things, what class names they're gonna have. And even in this, like in this case, these are the bigger parts of the page, so it's a no-brainer. When we start getting to smaller parts of the page, then you should also have an idea of what those things are going to be. And I'm saying this because you just want to be using the proper naming convention, just so that when you come back to this later on, you know what everything is. Like we worked on this last week, right? And we went a whole week without looking at it. You come back to it, okay, well you know what all this stuff is. Okay, these are some variables. This is for the border. This is for the transition, so we don't keep repeating it over and over again. You know what all this stuff is because it says it, blue in the face. Navigation stuff, the list items in the navigation, more navigation, the A tags, whatever, main content, sections within the main content. Okay, the transition box. This must be a box that has a transition on it, some text that we're scaling up, right? Okay, this is targeting an attribute. That's cool. What is it? Well, it's the well, I know what this is because it's a car, but you know, we're targeting things with an attribute, right? Not hard to go and if we didn't know exactly what this was, look it up. But we're just transitioning that thing, right? Translate box. Okay, well, this means transform translate. We're moving it across the screen, right? This is what we wrote today, so that's obvious, but perspective parent, okay, this is a parent box to something. Oh, there's this child. You know what I mean? You just the more accurate you are in your naming convention is just the easier your life is going to be. And this doesn't just apply to CSS. This applies to PHP. It applies to jQuery, JavaScript, everything, any type of coding, right? When you give when you make a variable, you want it to be an accurate variable that describes to you what it is, right? When you make a CSS variable, same thing. When you make a class name, same same thing, right? So just try to be as accurate as you can and be as mindful of like the future as you can. And from there, you're already building your CSS from there because again, if you know what class names you're running, you could start writing the CSS before you even start working on the CSS. You could build a CSS boilerplate, because you already know, okay, these are what all the sections are. There's the page, right? And then you can just keep building on top of it, right? So now we got to think, okay, well, what we have the we have the beginnings of what we're building, right? We went from 0 to 60, right? We went from 0 to something that we could actually sit back and look at and say, okay, this is the framework of where we're going to be building. Now let's keep building on top of it. What else do we need? What have I been tasked to do, right? Like what do they want on the website, or what do you want on the website? Whoever the website is for, what do they want? Okay, well, do they want forms, some animated stuff, whatever, pop-up modal boxes, marquees, whatever, right? Things moving about on the screen, you know, uh, you know, the classic flex box with the 3 different items in it. I don't know. Maybe they want a grid. Maybe we need tables. Maybe we need forms. Whatever the case may be. We plan that out, right? We got to plan that out. It's okay. Like, what is the data that we're putting on this web page? Even if it was just like I don't know, a web page that just had a bunch of YouTube videos on it. Maybe you have a YouTube channel and you want to just plop your YouTube videos on a page. Okay, cool. You're gonna run a CSS grid, and each cell is gonna have a thumbnail for the video in it. Okay, cool. You still got to plan that out, right? So you figure out what it is you need, and then you build on top of this. You build on top of what you already have. Your boilerplate, right? You build on top of this, and you start putting things inside of here in the main content area, or main content areas if you're going to have more than one, right? But you should know that just by what it is that you've been told to do, right? What it is that you've been told to build, or whatever it is that you yourself planned to build. You also want to be thinking in layers, and you want to be thinking scalably, right? So when I say think in layers and think scalably, I mean in the sense like you know already that websites work usually from the top down. All right, cool. We know that. Again, there is the case every now and then where you get somebody that builds a website in a different way, where it goes across the page or across and down, and then I've seen websites that it's like a little journey that you go on, and you keep scrolling down, but when you're scrolling down, instead the page scrolls side to side, and then it starts scrolling down, and it starts scrolling. I'm not talking about that. That's rare. Those are rarity cases. 9.9 times out of 10, your website's going to work the same way. It's going to scroll down the page. So, granted, but we also want to be thinking about what's in the background, what's in the foreground, um, what elements do we want to pop out at the user. And look, you learned, you should have learned this in a design class, a previous design class, or a future design class. You'll learn it. This is like fundamental design theory type of stuff, right? You have to control what your user is going to look at, and you have to use their psychology to do that. Now, what psychology am I talking about? Well, every human being looks at a screen or a paper or a billboard or a whatever in the same way, in a Z pattern or an F pattern or a backward Z pattern or a backward F pattern, depending on what language they speak, right? And perspective, because what's backwards for me is the opposite for other people. You see what I'm saying? It just is what it is. But regardless, Doesn't matter. Human being is a human being. It doesn't matter what language they speak. Their eyes are going to scan a screen the same way. For some people, it just might be the opposite way. That's it. So, what things do you want to stick out at them? And where are you going to put those things that you want to stick out? You got to put it in their way. You got to put it where they'll already be looking, right? Where they're already going to be looking. The prime example right here. You see this page, the person is already going to start looking here. Your eyes are already going to start here somewhere because that's just what you do. The logo is usually over here. So that's where this is where all of our brains have been trained to look. And this isn't just from websites. This is from before websites. This is from newspapers. This is from every publication that human beings have been looking at since the printing press. Okay? So by now, it's just something that we all do, right? Because we've been doing it our whole entire life, right? So if it's something that you want to stick out there, you're gonna put it in their way where they're already gonna be looking. You put this in the foreground, then you have the background, and then you have more foreground and so on. You see? So you want to be thinking scalably down the page, and you want to be thinking um, in layers as if they were like, Photoshop layers or something, like three-dimensional layers, even though it's not really 3D. But you get what the point is, right? If I were to show you this website, you might, well, this is their old website. This is the Ubisoft or Ubisoft, however you want to pronounce it. It's a website. I don't remember what year this was from. I think it was like from 5 years ago or something like that. I don't remember. But you might look at this and be like, whoa, this is like some complicated whatever website. It's not. None of them are. No website is really complicated, right? It's just scaled up or scaled down with more stuff or less stuff. That's it, right? You got a footer. Well, before the footer, you got the nav bar at the top. The nav bar just has a bunch of list items in it, like we usually do. Or it could be a flex box with a bunch of like flex elements in it. It doesn't really matter. You could do it either way. Then you got a header. You get a background image of the header. You got a foreground element on the header. All it is like if we were to put, pretty sure we've done this before. Where's the damn header? Oh, up here. It'd be the same thing if you just wrapped this in a div. Like if this was in a div and you had the H1 in there. Whoops. Damn it. There. And then you could have some other stuff and whatever, blah, 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 blah. You could put whatever in here. You could put all kinds of stuff in there. It doesn't matter. But that's all it is. It's just another element. And to make it a circle, you just tell this div to have a border radius of 50%. Done and done. Right? You could have some images in there. Whatever. So same thing. And you got the main content. The main content has a sidebar, a middle bar, and that's it because there's no sidebar here. You could technically make this a 3-column sort of thing. You could make this this could just be a flex box, right? And you could either have the flex box taking up 100% the width with 3 columns, 1, 2, and a blank column here, or you could just have the flex box with 2 columns and have the flex box be with, I don't know, 70%, right, of 70% the width of the wrapper, and then just have it sitting to the left, which it would be doing by default anyway, right? There's different ways you could do the same thing. How do you want to do it, right? What's the easiest way? Then you have footer 1, footer 2, footer 3, footer 4. You could arguably say, like, this is easy to see. Footer 1 with the 4 things in it, right? And it could be like 4 things, but each 4 things has 2, like an upper and a lower, right? And the lower, which would be this little box here, would just be, it just has like a transparency, or, to sitting sort of over the first one with a transparency and some text in it or something like that, right? Same with the footer 2. Footer 2 could be all of this, where you have this top bar here. So this whole thing would be a div, and then you could have the top div, and then another container, which would tell display flex, and then you just have the flex items going 1, 2, 3, 4. And this could also have an upper and a lower, right? So the upper could just be the image, and then the lower could be this little bit of, this text that you kind of have down here with the little controller and whatnot, right? Then footer 3 is just one div with a bunch of logos in it. You could just have a bunch of images and display those images, like you could display them as flex items. Or you could wrap them each in a div and give it that extra layer if you want. It could be done either way. It doesn't really matter. Footer 4, right? You could have an upper, a mid, and a lower. So like one div with 3 divs in it. This first div just has this H1 in it. The second div has some, again, display flex, done and done, right? Give them a background color and, throw this little circle icon in there, and it's good to go. And then the third one would also be display flex. You could just have these little circles in it, display flex, right? They could all be in their own div too. Doesn't really matter. Now, we could argue that this footer 4 could encompass also this too, and you could just separate it with a horizontal rule. Actually, all of them look like they have a horizontal rule. Could be a border bottom too. I mean, there's different ways that we could build something that looks exactly like this, but and then you just have your content in there with this button and the copyright section. Me, typically, I would put this bottom line in its own div, which would be a copy section. So what that would look like would be under the footer, I'd have a div, or let me just do this cope dot copy, and that would have some whatever H4, something like this with the year, blah 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 blah, so that would be the copy underneath the footer. And there's so many different ways that you could build this, but you just got to figure out which way you want to build it and start building it. You build the architecture. So I mean, footer, you could have one footer with a bunch of different sections in the footer. So each section would be like, this would be this top footer, then you could have another section and then another section and another section. Or you could just run separate footers. You can have more than one footer. Me, typically, I don't always like it doesn't really matter to me like writing semantically, non-semantically. I prefer divs because I just believe that divs just kind of, I don't know. I'm maybe it's just because I'm used to doing both, so I wouldn't even say it's that. In my opinion, I just think that the class, giving class names just gives it a more uniform sort of look, you know. But footer one, footer two, footer three, something like this could be your solution in this case, right? Footer three, and then was there footer four? No, yeah, there was footer four. So footer four should be down here, and then the copyright section, right? And then the copyright section with the thing, you know. Then each one of these has four. Well, the two first ones have four flex items. So, you know, you just have four divs in there, you know. And then the second one, same thing. And then you just put your content and keep building on top and building on top and building on top. But none of this stuff is complicated. It might look like it is, but it's not. Okay? It's all really just it's a bunch of little bite-sized simple things. And all of those bite-sized simple things combined make the big fruit or the big cow that you eat little by little. Okay? So, um, like it says here, be surgical and be specific. Sometimes you're going to need to be very surgical and be specific. Sometimes you won't need to be. But you want to be able to target things, um, you know, both on big scales and on small scales and on multiple scales if and when you need to, right? Um, and keep in mind that you can give things more than one class if you need to. If you need to use that, then do it, right? Um, and again, you know, using multiple classes allows you to like maybe use one for one thing and use the other class for another thing. Maybe you use one for a generalized use case where it's going to affect a bunch of things at the same time. And then the other one is maybe just for that one specific thing, you know. As for snippets, um, like, okay, and this doesn't only just apply to snippets anymore. This applies to, I should add, and AI, because using snippets and using AI, um, you know, the look, developers do that. Like developers use snippets, use AI, use tools to streamline their workflow. But I will say this: for for you, as you're learning, like you don't want to take shortcuts while you're learning, right? You want to try to not take shortcuts while you're learning. That way, you actually learn the foundational and fundamental things that you need to learn. And learn isn't even the right word. It's understand, which is the right word, right? You really have to take the time to understand what you're looking at. What are we looking at here, right? You get to a certain point where you just understand it plain as day, where it's like you could look at this and it's like reading plain English, right? But you have to get there first. And to get there, you have to write this stuff. What ends up happening with a lot of people is like they might learn how to, like maybe they learn how to read it, but they don't learn how to write it, or vice versa. Like, you know what I mean? Like you get um, these weird sort of mind traps that people get caught in when they're learning this stuff. And the reason why they get caught in mind traps is because they don't learn how to just write the stuff. They don't learn the fundamentals. One good way to do that is to use code snippets all the time and to just like use AI and let it do all the work for you. that's not going to help you. You can use those things, but use them after you already know what you're doing, right? Um, so yeah, that's just what I would say for that. Just sort of, and obviously you don't want to hand in assignments that are plagiarized, for the sake of what I'm talking about is more so in the sense of like when you're out in the field and working and how to approach your overall education. But when you're handing in assignments, definitely do not use snippets or AI. um, but as far as your workflow goes, once you're done and you already understand this, then you can use snippets and AI. Now, which brings us to the next part, which is memorization. Like, when you are learning this stuff, again, this is another language. You're literally learning a new language. It's no different. Well, it is different than a human spoken language or whatever because we don't speak this. We just write it and reread it. But it still is learning a new language nonetheless. And to learn the language, you have to use the language. And you start really simple. You start really simple. You start with, like, I'm sure you memorize what a div is by now, right? I'm sure you memorize what H1, H2, H3. You see, like, we started slow, we started small, we used the same things over and over again, and then we slowly start switching it up, and maybe instead of using divs, we use semantic tags or whatever. We start throwing more at it. We start just incrementally stepping it up, using different ways of selecting things, using more attributes and stuff like that, right? You're never going to know all of this stuff, right? Like, that's not how the human brain works. You're not supposed to memorize all this stuff. And it gets even worse when you start thinking of getting into like actual programming. You start thinking of getting into like JS or PHP or whatever. Like, you're not supposed to memorize all that stuff, and you're not supposed to really necessarily memorize all the things that you build, because like, are you going to be building that same thing over and over and over again? Okay, well, if that's the case, then go ahead and memorize it, but you're usually going to be building different things because you're always going to be building different solutions, right, for different problems. So you don't necessarily want to memorize all the things that you build. You just want to memorize the syntax. You want to memorize the language. And even with that being said, you don't always really memorize the language either, because it depends on how often you use it, right? If you end up getting into this field and you're predominantly coding, I don't know, HTML and JavaScript or something, well, okay, all the programming languages are similar. They're not all the same, but they're similar. But you might not memorize, PHP or SQL or something, right? And then you need to go and build something with PHP and SQL. Well, you just go and look it up. You just use the internet as your reference. Like, look in the example here, right? Um, so in the case of CSS, you know, if we start typing in font, like, look at all the different things you can do with a font. Are you going to memorize them all? No. You'll memorize the ones you use, and you keep it moving. If there's something else that you need to do that you don't know how to do, well, at least you know how this looks, and you know how the structure works. You know how to do it. It's like I give you a hammer, and you know how to use the hammer, and now you can build a bunch of different things with the hammer, right? You get a bunch of hammer nails and some wood, and you know how to cut it and do that. That's the foundation. now you can go build a boat or build a house or build a wooden car or something, build a go-kart or something. You see what I'm saying? That is how you want to approach the language itself. Okay. So finishing up your thing that you're building, whatever it is that you're building, you know, look, there's as you're building these things, um, and this thing is all complaining about that. um, as you build these things, you build projects, whatever, it's not going to look like this, right? It's not going to look like polished off as you build it. You know what I'm saying? You might have things going on where you're prototyping something, and I don't know, maybe you were doing something in here and you didn't want to go to the CSS, so you put some style tags there and you targeted the header and you try to do something to see if it would work. Okay, whatever. You can do that but you want to make sure when you finish the thing, when you're finishing the project, you polish it off. You know what I mean? Like, you want things to be polished, you want your code to be clean. You know, you want it to be easily read. You want your indents to be done properly, right? Like, these are all properly indented, right? We can see the clear, you know, parent-child relationship. This has nothing in it, but of course, if we're going to put something in it, then it would be, inside of there and so on, right? So, you want to make sure that you go over everything with a fine-tooth comb and sort of like, polish everything off. Get rid of anything that doesn't need to be there. Maybe you're loading two CSS scripts, one for one thing, one for another. Maybe all your animations is in one. Um, you know, and you have, you know, it's another CSS forward slash um, something like this going on, right? Um, maybe you got something like this going on, whatever the case may be. But you want to make sure that you polish it off. Once I'm done, I'm going to take all of my animations out of here and I'm going to copy and paste them into this file so that I only need the one file. Before you finish, you want to just make sure that you clean everything up. You know what I'm saying? Make sure everything is organized properly, structured properly. Make sure your CSS is organized properly. How do we organize it? The same way we've been doing it, right? And there's a reason why I do things the way that I do it, because the way that I do it, I don't have to go and polish it up when I'm done. When I'm done, it's done. I clean up my mess while I'm making the mess. You feel me? So I just prefer to do it that way, and you can do it that way too. But some people just don't work that way. Some people, as they're building, they create a bigger mess, and that's just how they work, which is fine, right? But you just want to make sure that when you are done, um, you know, things are clean and they're easy to look at. You know what I mean? So just remember to finish off, that development is a huge field. You're not going to know everything. Like I said, you're not ever going to know everything, right? You can build something and like 10%, like your JavaScript game is like 10%. That doesn't mean you can't build stuff. You can still use it and accomplish what you need to get accomplished. You just have to look things up. You know what I mean? Um, and like I said, you might end up specializing in one thing, which is good, which is great, right? And you leave other things that you don't know to other people. You're going to end up being better at something and then maybe not good at a different thing. It just is what it is, right? Maybe you enjoy doing one thing and you don't like doing another. Maybe you enjoy writing CSS and you hate writing anything that has to do with programming. Maybe you like programming and you hate writing anything to do with CSS. It just is what it is, right? Some people are going to want to work with everything. Some people are going to want to do a little bit of everything, and that's fine as well. Just work with what you got and work with what you do and what you want to do. Um, you know, like it says here, like one of the things that I specialized in was open source content management systems, and I still work with them a lot. Sometimes even just for fun, right? It's just whatever you like doing, you know. But you by now should feel like you're sort of gravitating towards a certain subfield of the whole multimedia thing. You know what I mean? And if you are, then that's good, and that will sort of give you an idea of the direction that you're going to want to go in. You might want to be full stack dev. If you want to be if you want to be doing a little bit of everything, full stack. If you want to be more working in the back, you know, the like sort of underground depths of the server, then maybe you want to start looking into SQL programming and PHP and stuff like that. You know, if you're more like, oh, I want to be in the forefront. I want to be making graphics and doing all that type of stuff. Great, right? But you're still going to want to be able to understand a lot of the things that we're doing here. Because where are your graphics going to be, right? The graphics are going to be on the web page like this. Somebody made this graphic, right? You know, even if it's a screenshot of actual game footage or something, somebody still had to doctor it. The graphic designer did that, and they designed it for a website. So, you know, it just is what it is. We're working with digital media, and no matter what area of digital media you want to play around in, we're all going to be working in the same sort of pot. And this just happens to be where it all goes in some HTML in some HTML code somewhere. Whether it'll be dynamic, probably yes, but still some HTML code, some CSS code, some PHP code, you know. So that should give you a better idea and understanding of where and how to start. You know, when I'm not around, you know, when you're on your own and you got to start something, that should give you some direction. So that's it. We'll end it there, and we'll see you next week in class. So have a good week.